From mules to the worst of the worst, today's list has got it all. Let's count down our list of top 10 messed up things in the life of George Washington. Let's do this. Also, I'm Canadian. You guys are American, most of you anyways. You're probably gonna correct me, so go ahead. Number 10, starting off strong with a mule breeder. Out of all the things I thought I'd learn about this dude, this was not one of them. A mule breeder. George Washington loved animals. I like that. A mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey, and they are particularly important for American farmers, and so Washington made it a priority. He is believed to be responsible for creating the mule stock that supported the agricultural community in the South. But he didn't stop there, oh no. Washington loved dogs including Dalmatians, foxhounds, French hounds, greyhounds, Italian greyhounds, mastiffs, Newfoundlands, pointers, spaniels, and terriers. There's a lot. Lions, tigers, and bear, oh my. A huge dog lover, he bred hunting dogs for speed over the years and gave them cute names like Sweet Lips, Venus, True Love, Taster, Tippler, Drunkard, and Madam Moose. Weird, okay? Those are some names. Number 9, and on the complete opposite side of that, we have the Spymaster. Funny enough, Washington actually wasn't keen on becoming president and he hated being general. But the one thing he was really good at and actually kind of partly enjoyed doing was being Spymaster. The Revolutionary War was ill-equipped, being perpetually undermanned and undertrained and undersupplied, so Washington had to think in another way to win, so he developed a secret intelligence network. Washington had a whole ring of spies that were so good even he didn't know who they all were. They utilized invisible ink to communicate letters, they used anonymous female spies such as the infamous Agent 355, an African-American double agent, a Patriot tailor who spied while making clothes for British officers, and then just so many. He was more deeply involved in the spy ring than any other American general-in-chief except for Dwight Eisenhower, who got really involved in World War II, but up until that point, it was just this guy. Number 8, Fairfax. We all have a first love. Some of us are lucky enough to still be with them, others are lucky enough to find someone even better. Hopefully, this was the case when he found Martha, but his first love was one Sally Fairfax. At 27 years old, Washington had just become engaged to Martha, but that September he wrote a romantic letter to Sally. He goes on to call himself a devotee and describe thousands of tender passages between them. He speaks of destiny that divides him and her from being together, but here is the catch. Sally was the wife of one of his best friends, George William Fairfax. If that wasn't enough to keep them apart, George was about to be married, so it had to be quits. The letter itself doesn't actually openly declare love per se, but something steamy is hidden behind metaphors. We often picture Washington as the white-haired old guy on money, but at one time the dude was young, robust, and clearly love-struck. Number 7, sparked a war. The history of North America is basically steeped in France and England, stomping over indigenous territory, playing in a game of tug-of-war, all while dealing with slavery. We're gonna get to all that later. However, Washington, being part of the Virginia militia, was a part of this. He was sent to the Ohio Valley with 10 troops to repel attacks from the French, but may have actually started a war. They had a small indigenous tribe ally with them, and they warned him that the French had a small force set up several miles away. They were supposed to be going to talk to them, but no one knows who fired the first shot, but a skirmish broke out. 10 French soldiers were killed plus 1 Virginian man, but the most notable death was that of Joseph Coulon de Villiers. He was a noble on a diplomatic mission and his death enraged the French. They were like, we are so angry. Because of this, très fâché. Because of this event, the conflict between Britain and France escalated into the French and Indian War. This soon spread into what would soon be known as the 7 Years' War. Number 6, Indigenous Relations. We kind of spoke about that earlier, but here we go, we're gonna go more in depth. Despite years and years of having to endure the BS that the Europeans put them through, like smallpox, I don't know, stealing their territory, all that stuff, you know the drill, somehow they were able to create pockets of allies with Native Americans. I don't know how. Throughout his life, Washington negotiated with Native Americans, served alongside them, fought against them, and sought their land. Like literally a walking contradiction all the time. It just looks like he just kind of did what he needed to do regardless, and just as long as it got him where he wanted to go. He respected their war tactics and even implemented some of them during the Revolutionary War. But then he would turn on them again. As commander-in-chief, he instructed armed forces to attack native nations allied with the British or those who resisted the expansion. When he became president, he followed the movement that wanted Native Americans to assimilate to their Western ideas. What? What the heck was it, man? You could fight beside them, but you couldn't respect them? I don't understand this. Number 5. Dentures. By 1789, because of health and happenstance, Washington had only one tooth left in his mouth that was his. Most of his food had to be softened and chopped up into little pieces so he could eat it. It was also why he didn't smile. But the man was fitted with some of the earliest dentures and they were not comfy. In fact, they caused further disfigurement later on in his life. One of the most ridiculous and most famous rumors surrounding George Washington's dentures was that he had wooden teeth. For a long time the rumor was that they were made from the wood of the cherry tree he cut down, but that wasn't true. Though the truth isn't much better. They actually came from ivory and real human teeth pulled from the mouths of the poor and possibly his very own slaves. I will expand on that later, stay tuned. There isn't precise proof that this indeed is the truth, but there is one marking in his ledger that shows the purchase of teeth from one of his slaves. So whether those teeth are actually from, like, for his dentures, we don't know, but what else would they be for? I'm glad he purchased them at least. I don't know, that's just weird to me, man. Number 4. At 11. Washington started young. He might have been one of the founding fathers of the USA, but his history does not stand away from injustice of the time. Before he could even make a choice about it, Washington inherited slaves at the age of 11 after his father Augustine died in 1743. In his will, he left his son a 280-acre farm in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Attached to that estate were 10 enslaved people, and Washington purchased at least 8 more. This included a carpenter by the name of Kit, and by 1755 he had purchased 4 men, 2 women, and a child. By 1799, over 317 enslaved people were living at Mount Vernon, with 123 people being owned by Washington himself. His wife Martha also received enslaved people from her late first husband, and over the century and by the end of the American Revolution, the percentage of enslaved people rose from 28% to 40% because of their union. Number 3. Speaking of slaves, we have Harry. If George was such a benevolent master, then why did his slaves want to leave? Answer is simple, because people are not objects and can't and shouldn't be owned. Harry was one of Washington's slaves and would gain popularity when he escaped Washington upwards of twice. The first time Washington paid £1 and 3 shillings to, and I quote, advertise for the recovery of his property. Though Washington was later for the abolitionist movement, he was a shrewd businessman and knew that should his slaves be freed, the Virginia economy would be in peril. So he fought as hard as he could to keep them as long as he could. On November 14th, 1775, John Murray declared any slaves will be freed if they were willing to bear arms to the British crown. Harry ran like hell, as did many others. This time Washington hired a slave catcher who managed to return 7 of what he determined was his property, but not Harry. He was currently serving as a corporal in the Dunmore's all-black loyalist regiment. He managed to evade him after the war, but life continued to be unkind to Harry and his wife. White settlers in Nova Scotia underpaid them and conditions were terrible. His tale sadly goes cold after he started a rebellion that got him banished at age 60 in Sierra Leone. Number 2, which brings us to it's complicated and awful. So as we know from the above, Washington owned a lot of slaves and it was really complicated. If Washington fought with the abolitionist movement and wanted slaves to be free, why did he have so many? By law, Martha nor George could set these people free. However, George put it in his will to ensure that every slave he owned be freed after his passing. Martha, his wife, made sure this happened, though it took a long time. It took until like 801 for everyone to be emancipated. However, despite this, his treatment of his slaves is still questionable. Visitors to Mount Vernon left behind conflicting accounts of Washington's treatment of his slaves. He frequently whipped and enforced hard labor, even forcing them to work 24 hours. On New Year's Day in 1789, he requested that his people work as soon as it was light and work until it was dark. He heavily relied on his people to work his Virginia plantation so that he could run a profit. In fact, this was the nature of the South, and Washington, being a businessman, knew that if slaves were freed, the economy would soon snowball. So, like I said, pretty complicated and really awful. Was he for or against slavery regardless of public opinion? If he had been given the choice to buy slaves, would he have? Who knows? But I think we can all agree that the fact that he owned and worked slaves is pretty messed up. People aren't property. And last but not least, his death. George Washington was terrified of being buried alive and ordered that his body not be touched until 3 days after his death. just in case. Throughout his life, he survived multiple near-death experiences, from diphtheria, tuberculosis, smallpox, malaria, dysentery, quinsy, carbuncle, and pneumonia. This man wasn't about to die easily. He even survived near drowning in ice and the burning and massacre of Fort Necessity. But in the end, it was a cold, something that today could have easily been fixed with some antibiotics. But instead, his doctors are really what did it. They essentially nursed him to death. They bloodletted him, removing around 40% of his own blood, for example. They even burned him. They made him gargle vinegar and molasses, which caused him to choke. It was a lot. It was actually this treatment that had the 1,000-year-old tradition of bloodletting finally called into question. And that was our list for today, folks. If you guys like this video, you know what to do. Like, follow, subscribe, be a part of the hive. I've been your host, Rachel Fisher, and until next time, folks, stay sweet bees. From her late first husband, Daniel Park Currit. After he started a rebellion. His tale goes, he was currently serving as a corporal in the oh god. Though Washington was later, by 1789 by health and by 1789 either by Washington inherited slaves at the age of 11. After her neither George or Martha, one of them managed to actually, no, sorry. That's wrong. Okay, sorry. Skip that bit. There we go. Fix it.